Dear friends, when we decided to organize a speech on the subject today, I think yourself or myself never thought of the importance of this day. Today is the historically important day in the sense it tells upon the rule of law in India, the democratic values. Not only that, it tells upon our justice dispensation system, the criminal investigation system, the police system, and ultimately the rule of law. Now, the judgment in Bambari Masjid demolition case came as a shock to the conscience of India. All the accused are acquitted, and of course, it's a travesty of justice. What we call the CBI as a right-hand henchman of the majoritarian tyranny, or parrot in the cage, as Supreme Court time and again observed. So, despite the fact that 2000-page judgment is not out completely in the public domain, at least as far as I'm concerned, it is not available for complete reading. But still, in the reports in electronic media as well as print media are reliable or trustworthy necessarily. It is a mockery, and we just can't expect this sort of a farcical prosecution in such an important criminal case, which tells upon the entire criminal investigation system and the justice dispensation in India. So definitely, whether the CBI release it or not, whether the political executive releases it or not, definitely it should be taken up in appeal. Whatever worth, there should be an opportunity for thorough probe and exploration to see that something could be done to do justice toward the society, the secularism, and the rule of law in India. So that is my primary observation regarding the judgment, because we can't say something more without reading the complete judgment. Anyway, the primary observation, of course, we can make something more. That is, certain observations in the judgment, as reported in media, are totally beyond the scope of a judgment in a criminal case. And of course, those observations manifest something more, that they are totally against accepted principles of criminal jurisprudence, Evidence Act, and criminal trial. So let us wait for complete details for making serious observations, analysis, and criticism of the judgment, so as to correct the entire system. So leave that subject there. I shall try to elaborate your title, that is, vilification of democratic values. But without going into the concept of democracy to optimum details, we can't say about the vilification. What exactly democracy means, at least in India, what exactly the democracy means, that is a platinum question, because of course we know that periodic election, formation of majority government, and supremacy of legislature, whether it is parliament or state legislature. So our pattern of democracy, our format of democracy is based on supremacy of the parliament, that is legislature. If this supremacy of the legislature and formation of majority government and of course periodic election are the alpha and omega of democracy, it will lead to a serious repercussion. But the very same democratic process, very same democratic route, you can make this democracy undemocratic. It can lead to authoritarianism. It can lead to fascism through this very same democratic process, the democratic format route. It is not an imaginative story at all, because we have got illustrative examples in history, world history. The recent illustrated history, very, very vivid and horrendous, is the case of Germany. Hitler came into power through the formal democratic process. But what happened after his election and formation of government? Everybody knows that. That owes the fascism, Nazism, and we know the Holocaust, extermination, genocide of particular religion or community, mass exodus, inexplicable and profound human tragedy. So that aspect is a subject for separate discussion on another occasion. My point is that if this formal aspect of democracy, that is periodic election, formation of majority government, and supremacy of the legislature are the basic tenets of Indian democracy, necessarily it will be a totally inhuman situation. That's why we say there are basic intrinsic value system in democracy. Unlike ancient democracy, let us examine for a while what happened in Roman Greek city-state. We say that there was democracy in the ancient Greece. There was democracy in the sense people elect the representative. But it is only a half-truth. Women and slaves were not in that process. They were totally outside the concept of democracy and election. They have no voting right. They had no voting right. So that democracy was a democracy of exclusion. But the modern democracy is a value system of inclusion, to include all the subjects in the nation, in the society, in that democratic process. So that's the basic thing. The second is that democracy is based on the concept of equality. Equality of value for your opinion as well as my opinion. If your opinion based on your assessed value, whether you are a zamindar or a pauper, if your opinion is valued on the basis of your assets, whether you have got 10 acres of land, 5 acres of land, or there is no property at all, you can't say that society is democratic. Similarly, if Ram's and Rahim's opinions are valued based on his religion, based on his religious belief, then we can't say there is democracy, because the moment equality concept is violated, the concept of the value system of democracy is violated. If your opinion's value is based on your religion, it is automatically violative of the concept of equality. Then also the value concept, the norms of democracy is violated. Thirdly, the democracy should be based on tolerance. Only because you are a majoritarian, you are the majority, you can't make a tyranny of majority and make onslaught on minority view. When I say minority view, it doesn't mean that it is only religious minority or linguistic minority. It means minority opinion. Even in a society of members, a homogeneous members of same religion, even then there will be minority view. So to tolerate minority view in the society is one of the characteristic features of the democracy. The other thing is that reasonableness. Suppose with your majority in power, brute majority in the legislature, you are passing unreasonable legislations. Suppose, take as an illustrative case. You are making a legislation prescribing punishment of death penalty for committing a theft of 10 rupees. If a boy commits a theft of 10 rupees out of his poverty, out of his starvation, of course, our democracy accepts the supremacy of legislature, and of course, legislature can pass any law, and the law passed by legislature following all democratic procedure, voting and all that, still that law will be unreasonable, and then you can't say that is a democratic society. So reasonableness is the main plank of democracy. What about human rights and civic rights? Without insulating human rights and civic rights, from the onslaught of majoritarian tyranny, you can't think of democracy at all. So, in all situations, we should insulate human rights and civil rights against the onslaught of majoritarian tyranny. So, these are the basic values of substantial values of democracy. The point is that how we develop this concept, we just can't imagine that this value system, our concept of democracy, fall from heaven on a fine morning. No. It is a product evolution, product of long struggle that is applicable to various other societies. Of course, the nuances of democracy in micro details may vary, but still the core concept of democracy are these concepts. Our concept, our democracy developed, our concept of democracy developed a long struggle, our freedom fight, freedom movement. We accepted, of course, that freedom movement was not a uniform, single linear strand. It was a combination of, integrated combination of various strains and strands. There were liberal Democrats in that movement. There were strains and strands of movement which based on the religious belief. There were extremists, there were communists, but primarily and generally the mainstream movement accepted the concept of democracy as now I projected, because the French Revolution gave that slogan. What was that? Liberty, equality, and fraternity. That slogan we accepted because that is the product of modern society, and we accepted that as our slogan during freedom movement. So we can't think of a society which is theocratic, which gives power to the government to discriminate people based on the religious belief, to discriminate people based on their assets, based on the property value. We can't. So we develop our value system, our democratic value system, through this long struggle. And of course, we imbibe the idea from the contemporary world, as I just said about French Revolution. So that is the accepted concept of our democratic value system. So if you don't accept these concepts as substantial aspect of democracy, you will be in trouble. The moment you are elected with a brute majority through democratic process, you may declare tomorrow by passing a legislation in the legislature stating that we don't require election in every 5 years. We can make this election in 10 years, that is sufficient. And of course, only certain members, certain citizens will have voting right. Only majoritarian religion, only members of majoritarian religion can have voting rights. Only persons with a threshold asset, threshold value of asset can vote in the election because you have got majority in the parliament. That is why we say if such laws are passed, it will be against the substantive aspect of democracy. So what do you do when there is conflict between the substantive content and the formal content? There should be some method and machinery to resolve the dispute. There should be independent arbitrator. And without any technicality, we can say this independent arbitrator to resolve the conflict between the formal aspect of democracy and the substantive aspect of democracy, that is the judiciary. That's why we say the judiciary has got immense role in developing the society, in developing democracy, at least in India. That is not the end. All these concepts now I mentioned as substantive aspect of democracy, these are all in amorphous, abstract form. It should be in written, concrete form. Then only we can make reference to that in resolving the dispute, the conflict between the formal aspect of democracy and substantial aspect of democracy. And that written concrete form of our democratic values, the concept of democracy, that exactly what we call constitution. So constitution is ultimately a political document, a written form of our concept of value system, our concept of substantive value system of democracy. So that is it. So now we read our constitution as well as the judiciary. But another aspect we have to resolve. Suppose using this brute majority, the majoritarian government is prepared to venture for a majoritarian tyranny, making onslaught on all the concept, all the precious value concept, on all minority view in the society, making arbitrary and unreasonable laws to switch over to another system of society not based on democracy. So in that process, using that majority, you can change, you can alter, you can amend our constitution, the basic document given in written form for reference. Because we accept the concept of parliamentary democracy and supremacy of the parliament, supremacy of the legislature. This conflict, this futuristic problem was known to the fathers and mothers, the founding fathers and founding mothers of the Constitution. The Constitutional Assembly knew this aspect. They are aware of it. They were aware of it. That is why, though there is supremacy of the parliament, supremacy of the legislature, as per our Constitution, for amending the Constitution, absolute simple majority is not sufficient. For making a legislation, even for removing our prime minister, only single majority is sufficient. But for making amendment to the Constitution, you require 2/3 majority. Not only that, it is somewhat complicated. In certain situations, the consent, the agreement of state legislature is required. That is why the forefathers and foremothers of the Constitution, the founding fathers and founding mothers of the Constitution made that much restriction for amending the Constitution. Otherwise, every now and then, the majoritarian government can totally alter the concept of democracy in India. But let us assume something more. By using the brute majority, you are going further. You have got two-thirds majority. What will be the solution for that? By using the two-thirds majority, you are amending the Constitution to change the Constitution for prescribing a presidential form of government, changing from parliamentary democracy to presidential form of democracy. So what is the remedy? You are changing the pattern of election. You are changing the parliament democracy. You are altering the basic concept of equality as well as secularism. Tomorrow, by using a brute majority, you declare by passing an amendment to the Constitution, by using the amending power in the Constitution, saying that India is no more a secular country. India will be a country of majority in religion, or it is a theocratic society, theocratic India. So even this eventuality is now not possible by democratic process. That is why I said the judiciary is the watchdog. Judiciary, with reference to the Constitution, is the watchdog of our democracy. How? In 1973, a 13-member bench of the Supreme Court analyzed all these aspects, analyzed the amending power of the Constitution, amending power of the Parliament, whether you can amend each and every provision of the Constitution. Supreme Court declared by majority, no, you can't. You can't change the basic structure of the Constitution. The parliamentary democracy, secularism, and equality, all these, of course, federalism, all these core concepts are part of our basic democratic value system. And these concepts are basic features of our Constitution, basic structure of our Constitution. So whatever be your majority in the parliament, whether in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, you can't touch that basic concept. So after this Kesavananda Bharati case in 1973, declaring that these concepts are a basic structure, a basic features of society, basic features of the Indian Constitution, you can't amend these concepts. So this judgment, the concept of basic structure developed by the Supreme Court, is the only legal constitutional remedy, constitutional shield against onslaught of majoritarian tyranny in our society. So the government, now the government in power, they have got huge majority. Immediately after election, though they came into power through democratic process, I mean formal democratic process of election, the second day, the leaders of the political executive started saying, no. The concept of secularism was added later. It was not in the original Constitution. So you can't add that word, term, concept, and all that. But they realized one fact: they can't amend that concept at all because of the concept of basic structure declared by the Supreme Court. So of late, they realized that they just can't formally amend our constitution to make it a presidential form of government, a theocratic government, a theocratic society of majority religion. No, they can't. Formally, they can't. So they realized, they thought that no, they don't want to change that. They don't want to amend the constitution to make it formally a non-secular state, make it formally something different from a democratic society. They don't want formally. But they realized that they could something more, though they can't do it formally by constitutional amendment. They thought of an extra constitutional method to browbeat all the constitutional institutions. Of course, I'm not bracketing judiciary with that other institutions. Constitution, I mean, the judiciary I will discuss later. All other constitutional and democratic institutions, Election Commission, CBI, Vigilance Commission, all the institutions, they realize that is the easiest way, a shortcut to destruct the independence, autonomy, and accountability of all these institutions by various methods, by browbeating, by politicizing selection, by selective investigation, framing, and putting every institution under surveillance mode of the state. You can frame the persons chairing the institutions. You can select such persons so that they could be browbeating. They may surrender. This is their view now. So first thing they have done is to destruct the autonomy, independence, and accountability of all democratic constitutional institutions. I'm not bracketing the courts, judiciary. Of course, that is a different thing. Altogether, we will discuss later. For this, they started using different methods, as I stated, browbeating, politicizing selection, and all that. That is one aspect. Second, more important thing is that to create, to manufacture consent in the society for their majoritarian tyranny. For that, they started whipping up of jingoistic nationalism in a violent manner. Violent manner. And that too, that concept was based on majoritarian religion. Hindutva, I mean, not Hinduism. Hinduism is different from Hindutva. That is the first thing they have adopted to whip up, to campaign for a violent, jingoistic nationalism in India. Of course, they succeeded to an extent because at the very same time, internationally, there were ISI versions of terrorism based on Islamic fundamentalism, and their Indian versions are there, Pakistan versions are there. So whipping up all these things, they could succeed to an extent in creating or manufacturing a mood for jingoistic violent nationalism in India. We just can't say all the persons, citizens, and people who support nationalism, we are all nationalist people. But certain persons accept the nationalism as this jingoistic nationalism projected by certain groups. They are fed with international terrorist organizations based on Islamic fundamentalism and their avatar in India and Kashmir. So they use this, they handle this. As far as they are concerned, this was very handy to whip our jingoist nationalism in India. Second thing, they started campaign against reservation in India, projecting an unreasonable proposition that merit should be the reason, merit should be the ground for selection, and because of reservation, merit is given a go by, and that's why India suffers in science, technology, and whatnot. And they won't say how this merit came. They never say the historic exclusion of certain groups for 5,000 years or more from involving in social process, involving in governmental process, exclusion even from basic education, caste oppression. And this caste oppression led to their subjugation, not only economic and socially, but even in thought process. So this they won't say. And thirdly, direct exclusion or an attempt to keep aloof from social process. Who are the group? Minority, religious minority, language minority, linguist minority, as well as scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. For that lynching happened in the name of Gomamsa, cow slaughter, and all that. So at one point of time, the onslaught was on the basis of food. All these attempts were to create conflict in the society, to make terror in the society, to dissipate, disseminate a chilling effect in certain groups so that they will keep away from social process, social life, and to create or manufacture concern for majority in onslaught. And then came Kashmir issue. There are more than 11 states who are enjoying special status as per the constitution, special benefits, legislative and otherwise. But you only campaign against Kashmir as if this is the root cause of Indian problems. But you don't say how this Kashmir Accord came into being, the historical aspect, the historical special status of Kashmir, you won't say. So use this Kashmir special status, citing the fact that the Kashmir is predominantly Muslim based, Muslim majority, And of course, the campaign for jingoistic nationalism. So coupled with that, you whipped up this special status of Kashmir as the root cause for Indian problem. So that also generated, or that also whipped up jingoist nationalism in India. The Pulwama attack, they could utilize this very effectively to whip up jingoist nationalism in a violent form, violent no. Then came the CAA. There has been unprecedented participation of students and youth against CAA, despite the fact that they have no political leanings towards any particular political party. We accuse them of apolitical. No. This new generation of students and youth, they are not having any politics at all. They are doomed school, public school boys and girls. They have no regard for social issues and all that. No. Despite all these unfounded allegations, they came out because of their basic concept of democracy, as I mentioned earlier. Though, of course, they are not having particular leanings to any particular political party, they are having that concept of democracy. So they came to public sphere and started agitating against the CAA. They realized that this is against secular fabric, secular polity in India, the basic concept of our democracy and constitution. So agitated, not violently, not resorting to violence. Nobody appealed to anybody for resorting to violence. People expressed solidarity. They all appeal to people, youth, students, and all sections of society to resist this majority onslaught, to resist this onslaught on secularism and democracy in a peaceful manner. They all adopted Gandhian methods, Gandhian Dharna method, Gandhian Satyagraha methods. So people came out in large numbers, unprecedented manner. That also irritated the political executive, who are prepared to venture for majoritarian tyranny. Then came the Delhi program, Delhi riot. The agitation against CAA started in November onwards. But the Delhi program, Delhi riot happened in February only. But during this period, the people of majoritarian tyranny, they have been thinking of various methods to counter this agitation, counter the democratic agitation. The students of JNU and Jamia Millia, who participated in anti-CAA agitation, they were targeted. The executives started framing persons by creating or manufacturing some statement from some persons belatedly out of force or duels. So they started framing students and youth, denying bail. They know that no charge will be proved in a court of law. You can't prove any offense. They have not committed any offense. Even for democratic expression of dissent, you are charging with sedition. You are slapped with sedition charge, accusing him or her as anti-national. Every criticism against head of the political executive, head of the government, or a leader of the government is branded as sedition and that activity as anti-national. For that, you have created a sort of, you have manufactured a sort of mind to accept that concept to an extent. That is the context of framing mainstream political leaders, teachers, professors, academics, intellectuals, and lawyers. They know that no charge will be proved at all, but they want to spread a chilling effect in the society. And to an extent, they succeeded. To an extent, they succeeded. Intellectuals from minority, intellectuals from other groups, even lawyers, certain members are muted. So this framing, this vilification of democratic values are part of well-orchestrated, well-thought-out big project. By using the Maoist extremism in certain parts of India, you whipped up a concept. What is that? Urban Naxals. Because people don't know that. People have seen certain atrocities and extremist action, even terrorist action by certain groups, Maoist groups. Citing that, people who have been in the agitation against environmental destruction, against onslaught on minority, against onslaught on scheduled caste, scheduled tribes and Adivasis, people who have been fighting for their rights, fighting for civil liberties, they are projected, they are accused of as urban Naxals. Because they have created that bent of mind in society with a premeditated, well-planned manner. So that is why now, at later point of time, they resorted to framing of democratically functioning mainstream political leaders and academics now. And of course, last week, 2 days before, various eminent retired judges, academics, and other intellectuals conducted a webinar. What was the subject? How to protect framing of charges, framing of persons as anti-socials, anti-nationals, as persons committed sedition and all that, by using Article 21 of the Constitution. How to resist this framing? That was the concept, that was the topic. This is A.K. Patnaik, this is Lokur, Madan Lokur, this is Talmeshwar, various other academies. Of course, very, very eminent academician, Dr. Mohan Gopal, he organized that webinar. The report, the presentation made by those eminent judges and academics, it was thought-provoking and shocking, because as per the presentation, more than 70 cases of seditions are charged in 2018 itself. was unprecedented. That much case did not arise till that. And of course, in 2019 and 2020, of course, it will be on the higher side. Maybe spiraling, of course, in numbers. So this shows the gravity and the colossal nature of this framing. So how do you resist all these things? See, of course, judiciary is the watchdog of our fundamental rights and democracy. And of course, the constitution and the courts. They are the protector of all these constitutional institutions, the judiciary itself, the courts, constitution, and democracy. But we just can't expect that judiciary can or could protect our constitution and the judiciary itself in all circumstances. I say because during the emergency, when the executive was so strong, our judiciary surrendered. I think you heard of ADM Jabalpur case, famous or infamous ADM Jabalpur case. During emergency, the constitutional bench of the Supreme Court openly declared that during the time of emergency, if an innocent person is shot and dead in the street openly by a policeman or a military person, we can't save your life. We can't protect your life and personal liberty by resorting to Article 21. This was the open declaration made by the Supreme Court. So how can we rely the Supreme Court in all situations? Yes, we have to rely the Supreme Court and judiciary for protection of our fundamental right, our right to life, our life, constitution, and democracy. How? For that, we have to protect, we have to develop the independence and accountability of the judiciary. Of course, after almost 40 years, that ADM Jabalpur is overruled by another larger bench of the Supreme Court, declaring that ADM Jabalpur was wrong. So we took about 40 years to undo that injustice, to correct that mistake. So that is the process of judicial action. After 25 years only, from 1950 to 75, we corrected the wrong decision in A.K. Gopalan case. A.K. Gopalan case was decided on a wrong principle affecting personal liberty and life of Indian citizen. That principle ruled India, its judiciary, for about 25 years. We could correct that by another judicial process in Maneka Gandhi case. So it took almost 25 years to correct that mistake. So judiciary may commit, they may correct it. But by that time, you see that ADM Jabalpur law prevailed for so many years. But of course, that damage was corrected by the parliament, by the amending power of the constitution. That's a different thing. That's a different thing. But principle prevailed there. So ultimately, what is the remedy? Ultimate remedy is only peaceful agitation. Always people should be the watchdog of Indian democracy and constitution. Unless and until you are alert about judiciary, about democracy, about constitution, you will not be able to protect democracy and constitution in India. If democracy and constitution is not protected, you can't protect judiciary. If you are not able to protect judiciary, its independence and accountability, you can't protect democracy and constitution. So this is all interchanged, interconnected. That is why we say, as far as Indian democracy is concerned, independence and accountability of judiciary is very precious. And to maintain that, to develop that, to retain that, to redeem that, the selection of judges of the constitutional courts, the high courts as well as the Supreme Court, that is also very important. That is why we have been saying that we have been campaigning for an independent constitutional machinery for selection of judges of the high courts as well as the constitutional Supreme Court. We can't leave it to exclusively to the Supreme Court collegium. No, we cannot leave it to exclusively to judiciary for selection of judges to higher courts, that is high courts and Supreme Court. We just can't leave it to exclusively to the executive government also. There should be an independent constitutional machinery, and in that, all the stakeholders should have participation, representation. Legislature should have participation. Civil society should have. Judiciary must have participation, representation. And of course, the Indian bar, because they are the backbone of judiciary. Equally, they are important. Just like judges, lawyers are integrated component of judiciary. So there should be participation, representation from the bar also. Of course, at one point of time, there was an attempt to create such an institution. At that point of time, the present majoritarian political executive also supported that. BJP supported that. But by majority, the Supreme Court decided otherwise. They decided that no formation of this sort of judicial commission or judicial appointment commission will not be conducive for independence of the judiciary. We just can't accept the proposition of giving representation to a law minister in that process. We just can't accept the concept of giving representation to civic society, saying that Indian civic society is not matured enough for that and all that. But I'm not discussing the merits and demerits of the judgment at this point of time. Leave it there. But there is scope for further amendment of the Constitution, accepting the present opinion of the Constitutional Bench of the Supreme Court. Let us accept the view of the Supreme Court. Even then, there is scope for further amendment of the Constitution within the four corners of the judgment. We can substitute Attorney General for the law minister. So such amendment we can make. But now, the present government is not prepared for another constitutional amendment to create an independent judicial commission with comprehensive powers for selection and appointment, removal, inquiring into misdemeanor by judges. No, they are not. They of late realized a very important thing. They now realize that it is better to retain the present concept of collegium for selection of judges, so that they think that they can bargain with one or two judges, that is sufficient, because collegium means 3 or 5 members. If an independent national constitutional body is there, we have to deal with civil society, other independent members, and whether you could manage things or not, the Indian society would come out with some details of the discussion and all that. So it will not be as opaque as it is. Little bit transparency will be there. So that is not conducive for this majoritarian approach, majoritarian practice of democracy, in India. So now they don't want such a machinery at all. So that they think that this is the system conducive for inducting their own member, their own persons of their own choice in the higher judiciary. See, as Krishnaya observed many times, if you are not prepared to accept the philosophy of the constitution, if you are not socialist or secular as stated in the preamble of the constitution, you are not qualified to become a judge of the constitutional code. But now there are attempts to indict persons who openly declared that they are not secular. That calamitous situation never occurred in the past. Whatever be the demerits in the earlier selection process, whatever be the demerits in the candidates, otherwise, there was no such occasion that people who openly declared against the basic structure of the constitution. So such attempts are going on. So how do you resist this? To resist this, the only method is to form wide platform by way of social contract, broad spectrum, to resist the onslaught on democracy and constitution. It cannot be based on any religious belief. It cannot be based on minority religious belief. It cannot be based on any other concept. It should be based on totally secular concept. Otherwise, you will not be able to protect minority rights even. So all this attempt, all this process of fighting against majority and onslaught should be absolutely secular. We must be able to resist. We must be able to campaign against fundamentalism in every respect, terrorism in every respect. If the terrorism is based on Islamic fundamentalism, if there is avatar of that ISI in India, we must be able to resist and expose them. Otherwise, we may not be able to resist the majority onslaught on the democracy and the constitution as well as secularism. So let us campaign for, let us imbibe their culture. Let us educate people in a peaceful manner, to agitate peaceful manner in Gandhian and other peaceful methods to resist this onslaught. So let us educate people, educate students, educate youth to resist the onslaught on democracy, onslaught on constitution. The very recent example in illustrative cases of passing farm bills. I am not on the merits and demerits of farm bill. That's a different situation. On different occasion we can. But the way that Parliament passed that bills, every individual member has got the privilege and right to seek division of votes. If I am a Parliament member, I got a right to say that I am against it. I could canvass others' vote, so it should be put for vote, division of votes. You can't deny that privilege and right. That is the fundamental primary concept of parliament democracy. But if you are not prepared for that division of vote, you simply say, no, it is passed by voice of votes. That is end of parliament democracy. So this is the times. These are the times. So now this onslaught of democracy and onslaught on constitution is no more an imaginary story, not a matter to be discussed only by academics in the chambers, in the universities. It is a matter to be discussed and debated among the people on the street, as well as all public domain, all public places. So our attempt should be to educate people in peaceful manner. So with these words, I think I have took engrossed the others' time. So with these words, I conclude my presentation. I thank you for giving me an opportunity to share my views.